The world is running out of its energy capacity, according to the Saudi oil minister. What's up, everybody? My name is Joe Brown. This is the Heresy Financial Show, and today we are diving into a major problem with energy production worldwide. I've made a few videos about oil and energy on this channel before. Today we are looking at the current problems with production and how it is not enough to keep up with today's demands, let alone the future energy demands. And no, solar and wind are not going to solve it. Ready? Let's dive in. All right, take a look with me at this article where the Saudi oil minister is saying that he has never seen these things happen before. He's warning that spare capacity is decreasing in all energy sectors, which is one of the main causes behind crude oil, diesel prices, natural gas, and gasoline trading at near record highs. He goes on to say that he's been at these OPEC meetings since the 1980s. He's a dinosaur, but he has never seen these things happening right now. He said the world needs to wake up to an existing reality. The world is running out of energy capacity at all levels. This is concerning because without more investment across the globe, that is key, more investment, OPEC Plus would not be able to guarantee sufficient supplies of oil when demand fully recovers from the COVID pandemic. And it's not like they're not doing anything about it. Both Saudi Arabia and the UAE are among few producers that are investing in greater output. They're spending billions of dollars to raise their crude capacity by 2 million barrels a day between them by the end of this decade. But most others are struggling to get funding because governments are encouraging a shift away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Meanwhile, the price of gasoline has skyrocketed to all-time highs. Now, OPEC is trying to increase by 432,000 barrels per day, but it is struggling to reach even that monthly target, with many members pumping below their quotas. Now, with everybody paying much higher prices at the pump for diesel and gasoline, natural gas prices going up, it is not 100% due to the higher price of just crude oil. In fact, he said that they get a fraction of what companies get from their profit markup and then what governments are making from all the extra taxes. And the key to recognize right now, it is not a demand issue. Demand isn't 100% back up to where it was pre-2020, but we are still experiencing all of the markers of a mismatch between supply and demand, which means it's an issue of supply. In fact, in the US, there's a shrinking fleet of domestic refineries. Record gasoline prices, higher airfares, fears of diesel rationing, rumors of the government trying to pass price control laws, all comes down to too few refineries turning oil into usable fuels. About 5% of our country's oil refining capacity has shut down since the beginning of the pandemic. And around the world, capacity has shrunk by 2 million additional barrels per day. On top of that, there are no plans to bring new US plants online. So why in the world is supply dropping off while prices are going up? You would think that it should be the opposite. If profits for the existing companies are increasing, that should bring new investment. Well, when demand for gasoline and jet fuel vanished during the height of the pandemic, while the lockdowns were preventing people from actually traveling, mind you, companies closed some of their least profitable crude processing plants permanently, especially because an eventual transition towards cleaner energy makes their long-term business model unprofitable. It makes them less likely to attract buyers, also funding to fix plants that have been affected by fires, explosions, hurricanes that were too expensive. By the end of 23 next year, as much as 1.7 million barrels of US capacity is targeted for closure. So step one, due to the business cycle, there was a lack in investing for additional production of fossil fuels for about a decade now. That's cyclical. But number two, then you have 2020 happen and it shuts down travel across the world, most of it by declaration, most of it at the beginning, a lot of it was by choice, but after the beginning, a lot of that was by government coercion. Because of that, you have a collapse in profits, and so companies are forced to shut down their least profitable refineries. So you have a decline in investment in new production, and then you have a collapse in production from the government shutdowns. Third, you have a decline in investment long term, both in the recent past and looking into the future, because everybody's looking around at all of the government regulations saying we want to get rid of fossil fuels. We're only going to provide a path forward, regulatory and with subsidies, for clean energy, green energy, wind and solar. Meanwhile, almost everything, about 98% of literally everything you use all day long, is a byproduct of fossil fuels, both from the energy that it takes to produce it and because it's made of petroleum. And so if we think demand is going to magically evaporate overnight for petroleum-based products and for energy as a derivative of fossil fuels, we are deluding ourselves. Demand will absolutely either stay where it is or increase into the future, which is more likely. Take a look with me at this chart from our worldindata.org that shows the amount of energy per energy source that we have consumed since 1800. You can see traditional biomass used to make up almost all of the energy we consumed, and that has since declined to a very small amount. Same with coal, same with oil, same with gas. These are all on the decline as we get a broader, a much wider spectrum of energy sources. And the goal from regulators is to get most of this to solar or wind or hydropower in the near future. But I'm going to show you something. If you've never seen this before, there's a little check mark here that says relative. Now, this is key because the relative view of energy consumption completely distorts the reality of what's going on. If we uncheck this box, we can see the total amount of energy that's being consumed across the entire ecosphere here. From 1800 till now, the amount of traditional biomass that we've used has on average stayed just about the same, slightly grown over time. Coal has increased. Oil has increased. Gas has increased. What we see here is that over time, total energy consumption increases so much so that while the amount of energy source, the old energy source that we used to use for everything, it keeps on outputting the same amount of total energy that we used to get from it, but we add on a new, more energy dense form of energy on top of that. So when we found out about coal, we added coal on top of biomass. When we found out about oil, we added that on top of coal. When we found out about gas, we added that on top of oil. So just because it replaces the total percentage has nothing to do with the actual total demand. So while in the future we may have an increase in energy output from wind, from solar, but more likely nuclear, that doesn't do anything to the amount of demand that will stay in existence for all the previous sources of energy, as long as history is any guide. If history from this day forward looks anything similar to what it's looked like for the past 200 years, then that will be true. Unless we have turned a corner in history finally, and we are able to do things in a way that is very different from the way humanity has always done things. And when you look at the correlation between GDP growth, or total economic wealth, and total energy consumption, they're basically the same thing. If we want our world to get healthier, we need it to get wealthier. If you plot the wealth growth of the poorest people and regions in the world, as they get wealthier, they get healthier, they grow out of poverty, they start caring about their local environments, they start being able to plan for the future. That's happened everywhere for hundreds of years, and it will continue to happen. We need to provide more energy, we need to produce more energy, and that doesn't mean stopping producing energy from old sources. It means continuing to produce energy from all those sources and coming up with new, more powerful sources of energy. If we take a look at the safest form of energy, it moves down the line from brown coal to oil to biomass to gas. These are death rates globally from energy production per terawatt hour. We can see that nuclear is way safer by a huge margin than any of these forms of energy. And yes, that does account for all of the deaths that have happened as a result of 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, and Chernobyl. Nuclear provides for about 10% of global energy, yet there are only 440 nuclear power plants on Earth. You don't have to kill a bunch of species of birds and turtles and land animals to make wind and solar farms. You need about 1 square mile to build one. Very, very little local, regional environmental impact, and with an amount of uranium that can fit in this coffee cup, it will produce more electricity than you will ever use in your entire life, which means that the amount of nuclear waste that is produced as a result of transitioning more to nuclear energy means we can 100% deal with all of the nuclear waste. In fact, nuclear waste is stored in ways that cannot be accessed by any environmental impact, any earthquake, any flood, anything like that. All of the nuclear waste in history is about the size of 1 football field, 10 stories high. It is sequestered. It does not leave any environmental impact. It is the cleanest and the most energy dense and the most powerful form of energy that humanity has ever discovered. So the solution to all of the energy problems we are facing right now is not to cause regulations and to pass laws that make it harder to invest in oil and gas production. It's to make that easier, because if history says anything about the future, we will need as much oil as we ever had, plus more, just like we did with wood, just like we did with coal and every other energy form up until now. But it also means that we need a lot more energy in the future than we use right now, and it's always come on the back of a much more dense form of energy, not something with a 20-year life cycle with a very low energy density per square foot like wind or solar, which means that the safest and the most energy dense, most powerful, cleanest form of energy that will provide the energy needs for the future is going to be nuclear, and any country who jumps on the nuclear bandwagon will be the leader in economic growth because they'll be providing free energy for their entire country, their entire society, whereas all the other countries who decide to do the opposite will be much further behind. And any companies who are able to hang on, despite what's going on right now, to producing oil, producing gas, producing diesel, creating energy, creating nuclear energy, mining uranium, they have a potential to perform extremely well going into the future because it is inevitable the world will have to move that direction. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.